Og, the king of Bashan, stands out as one of the most formidable figures in the Bible, known for his sheer size, strength, and the fear he inspired. His name is mentioned in the Old Testament as a symbol of overwhelming power and seemingly insurmountable challenges. Og ruled over a region called Bashan, a fertile and prosperous land with over 60 fortified cities. These cities were not ordinary towns. They were protected by high walls, heavy gates, and strong defenses, making them nearly impossible to conquer by human effort alone. To the Israelites, Og and his kingdom seemed utterly unbeatable. What made Og even more intimidating was his extraordinary size. The Bible specifically mentions his iron bed, which was over 13 feet long and 6 feet wide, a detail that emphasizes his massive stature. Imagine standing in front of a giant so large that even his bed was a marvel of construction. To the Israelites, who were not seasoned warriors, but a wandering group of former slaves led by Moses, Og seemed like an impossible opponent. Yet, this is where God's power and promises became the defining factor. As the Israelites approached Bashan, Og, along with his mighty army, came out to meet them in battle. The Israelites were likely filled with fear. How could they possibly overcome such a powerful king and his well-fortified cities? But God spoke to Moses, offering words of reassurance that would change the course of history. "Do not fear him," God said, "for I have delivered him into your hands." With these words, God reminded Moses and the Israelites that the battle was not theirs alone, it belonged to God. Strengthened by this divine promise, the Israelites went into battle, not relying on their own strength or military expertise, but trusting in God's guidance. The outcome was miraculous. Despite Og's size, power, and the defenses of his kingdom, the Israelites completely defeated him and his armies. Every one of his 60 fortified cities fell into their hands, and the Israelites claimed the fertile land of Bashan as their own. This victory wasn't just a military conquest, it was a profound spiritual lesson. The Israelites were not an experienced or powerful nation, yet they overcame one of the greatest giants in their path. Why? Because they placed their faith in God. This triumph served as a reminder that no challenge, no matter how overwhelming it may seem, is too great for God to handle. For the Israelites, the defeat of Og symbolized more than the acquisition of new land. It was a moment of renewed faith. It reminded them that God's promises are unshakable and that his power is far greater than any earthly strength. The battle against Og taught them to trust in God's plan, even when the odds seemed impossible. In our own lives, the story of Og reminds us that we all face giants, obstacles that seem too big to overcome. But just as God delivered Og into the hands of the Israelites, he is capable of helping us conquer our own challenges when we trust in him. No giant is too large, no wall too high, and no battle too difficult when we place our faith in the power of God. Goliath, the legendary giant of the Philistines, is one of the most iconic figures in the Bible, embodying fear, intimidation, and the challenges that seem insurmountable. Standing nearly 10 feet tall, Goliath wasn't just a man, he was a towering warrior, heavily armored and well-armed, a symbol of unbeatable power. His armor alone weighed over 200 pounds, and his spear was as thick as a weaver's beam, with a spearhead that weighed about 25 pounds. To the Israelites, Goliath was more than a physical threat, he was a walking nightmare. For 40 days, Goliath taunted the Israelite army. Every morning and evening, he would step forward, shouting insults and challenges to the Israelites. He mocked their faith, defied their God, and demanded that they send out a single man to fight him in one-on-one combat. The stakes were high. If Goliath won, the Israelites would become servants to the Philistines. His threats struck fear into the hearts of the Israelites, including their king, Saul. No one dared to step forward, and the entire camp trembled in silence. It was during this time of fear and uncertainty that David, a young shepherd boy, entered the scene. David wasn't a soldier. He had no training in combat or experience in war. He was there simply to deliver food to his older brothers, who were part of the Israelite army. Yet, as he arrived, he heard Goliath's taunts and saw the fear in the faces of the soldiers. David, filled with righteous indignation, asked a bold question: who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David's courage wasn't rooted in arrogance or youthful recklessness. It came from his faith. He believed that the God who had delivered him from lions and bears while protecting his flock would also deliver him from this giant. When no one else dared to fight, David stepped forward. He rejected Saul's armor, saying he couldn't fight with something he wasn't used to. Instead, he went to face Goliath with the tools of a shepherd: a sling, 5 smooth stones, and, most importantly, unwavering faith in God. As David approached, Goliath laughed, mocking him for his youth and size. "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" Goliath roared. But David's response was powerful. "You come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." With those words, David ran toward the giant. Taking a stone from his bag, he slung it with precision and struck Goliath in the forehead. The stone sank deep, and the giant fell face down to the ground. David then used Goliath's own sword to finish him off, and the Philistine army fled in terror. This story is about much more than a young boy defeating a giant. It's a testament to the power of faith. David didn't rely on his strength or weapons. He relied on God. His victory wasn't just over Goliath. It was a victory for all of Israel and a reminder that no enemy, no matter how great, can stand against the power of God. For us, the story of David and Goliath is a call to trust in God when we face challenges that feel overwhelming. It teaches us that faith, not strength, is what truly wins the battle. Like David, we can declare, "The battle belongs to the Lord," and step forward with confidence, knowing that God is with us. The stories of Og and Goliath are more than accounts of ancient battles. They are timeless lessons that resonate deeply with the challenges we face today. Giants come in many forms. They might be fear, self-doubt, overwhelming responsibilities, financial struggles, or even the pain of loss. These giants can leave us feeling small, weak, and incapable of moving forward. But the Bible reminds us that we do not face these battles alone. Og and Goliath seemed unbeatable to those who faced them. Og ruled over a land of fortified cities with towering walls and mighty armies. Goliath, with his colossal size and intimidating armor, struck fear into the hearts of seasoned soldiers. Yet, in both stories, God's people were victorious, not because of their strength or skill, but because of their faith. The victories over these giants were not achieved through human effort, but through trusting in the power of God. In our own lives, we often encounter situations where the odds feel impossible. Maybe it's a diagnosis we didn't expect, a financial burden that seems too heavy to bear, or a relationship that feels beyond repair. These are giants. They stand before us, taunting and intimidating, much like Goliath taunted the Israelites. In those moments, it's easy to feel hopeless, to retreat in fear, or to convince ourselves that the battle is too great. But the lessons of Og and Goliath remind us of an important truth: God is greater than any giant we face. When Moses led the Israelites against Og, they were inexperienced and outmatched. Yet God told them, "Do not fear him, for I have delivered him into your hands." Those words didn't just reassure them, they empowered them to step forward in faith. Similarly, David, a young shepherd with no armor or weaponry, stood boldly before Goliath, declaring, "The battle belongs to the Lord." Both victories came not through human strength, but through trust in God's promises. God asks us to take that first step of faith, even when the path ahead seems impossible. He doesn't promise that the journey will be easy, but he does promise to walk with us every step of the way. Like David, we may feel unprepared. Like the Israelites, we may feel overwhelmed. But God doesn't call us to be perfect or powerful, he calls us to believe. These victories also remind us to shift our perspective. Too often, we focus on the size of our problems instead of the greatness of our God. Og's fortified cities were no match for God's power. Goliath's size and strength couldn't stand against a single stone guided by God. When we face giants in our own lives, we need to remember that no obstacle is too great for him. Finally, these stories teach us the importance of stepping forward. Faith isn't passive, it requires action. Moses led the Israelites into battle. David picked up his sling and approached Goliath. In the same way, we are called to act, trusting that God will guide and strengthen us. The first step may feel uncertain, but it's in those moments that God's power is revealed. Whatever giants you face, know that you are not alone. The same God who delivered Og into the hands of the Israelites and guided David to victory over Goliath is with you today. He asks only that you trust him, take the first step, and let him carry you through. Remember, no giant is too big when God is on your side. Faith is not something we merely think about or believe in silently. It requires action. The stories of Moses and David are perfect examples of this truth. When faced with challenges, they didn't just wait for God to solve their problems. Instead, they moved forward, trusting that God would meet them in their obedience. This act of trust is what makes faith come alive and allows God's power to work through us. Consider Moses. Leading the Israelites into battle against Og, king of Bashan, must have felt like an overwhelming task. The Israelites were not seasoned warriors, and their enemies were well prepared and fortified. But Moses didn't allow fear to paralyze him. Instead, he obeyed God's command to lead the charge, believing in God's promise, "Do not fear him, for I have delivered him into your hands." Moses' faith wasn't just a feeling, it was a decision to act, even when the odds seemed impossible. Now think about David. Here was a young shepherd with no armor, no sword, and no battle experience. Standing before Goliath, a giant wrapped in heavy armor, David could have easily succumbed to fear. But he didn't. Instead, David stepped forward with boldness, armed only with a sling, a few stones, and an unshakable trust in God. His courage didn't come from his own abilities. It came from his faith in a God who had delivered him from lions and bears before. David acted on his faith, and God delivered the victory. These stories remind us that faith is not passive. It's easy to believe in God when life is smooth, but when challenges arise, faith calls us to step into action. Acting in faith doesn't mean we ignore fear or doubt. It means we choose to move forward despite them, trusting that God is greater than our circumstances. In our own lives, we often face situations that feel just as daunting as Moses' battles or David's confrontation with Goliath. Maybe it's a medical diagnosis, a financial hardship, or a broken relationship. The temptation is to freeze in fear or wait for the problem to resolve itself. But God calls us to take the first step. He asks us to pick up the sling He has given us, whether it's a prayer, a conversation, or a leap of faith, and trust Him to do what we cannot. Faith in action doesn't always result in immediate victories. Sometimes the road is long and the challenges persist. But it's in these moments that we see God's power most clearly. When we take that first step of obedience, even when the outcome is uncertain, God steps in to do what only He can. Moses and David didn't see the full picture when they acted in faith, but their trust allowed God to work miracles through them. Faith in action also teaches us something profound about God's character. He doesn't require us to be perfect or to have everything figured out. He simply asks us to trust Him enough to move forward. When Moses raised his staff to part the Red Sea, the water didn't move until his staff was lifted. When David slung the stone at Goliath, the victory wasn't guaranteed by the stone, it was guaranteed by God. The same principle applies to us. We don't have to have all the answers or be the strongest, smartest, or most capable person in the room. God works through our weaknesses and our willingness to trust Him. When we step out in faith, God steps in and transforms our small actions into something far greater than we could imagine. So, what giants are you facing today? What step of faith is God asking you to take? It might feel small or insignificant, like David picking up a stone, but remember, faith in action invites God's power into your life. Take that first step and trust that He will meet you there. The battle is His, but He asks us to take part in it. When we act in faith, we create space for God to do what we cannot, and it's in these moments that His power and glory shine the brightest. The stories of Og and Goliath are more than ancient tales of triumph. They are enduring reminders of God's faithfulness and power in our lives. These victories teach us to reflect on what God has done in the past, allowing us to face future challenges with renewed trust. When we look back at the moments when God intervened, provided, or guided us through difficulties, it strengthens our confidence that He will do so again. For the Israelites, the victories over Og and Goliath were milestones in their journey of faith. These were not small obstacles, they were towering, seemingly unbeatable foes. Og ruled over a kingdom of fortified cities, his power symbolized by his massive iron bed. Goliath, with his intimidating size and relentless taunts, represented fear and humiliation. Yet, in both cases, God's power proved far greater than any earthly strength. These victories weren't just military achievements, they were profound demonstrations of God's unwavering commitment to His people. As Catholics, we are called to remember these moments, not just as stories from the Bible, but as evidence of God's faithfulness throughout history. We are reminded that the same God who delivered the Israelites from Og and guided David to defeat Goliath is with us in every battle we face. He doesn't change, and His promises remain steadfast. Life often brings its own giants. These may not take the form of literal warriors, but they can feel just as intimidating. Fear, doubt, financial burdens, health struggles, or broken relationships can stand before us like Goliath, shouting threats and making us feel small and powerless. The temptation is to focus on the size of the problem and forget the greatness of our God. But the victories of Og and Goliath remind us that no obstacle is too great for Him. God invites us to bring our fears, struggles, and doubts to Him. He doesn't ask us to fight alone. His words to Moses before facing Og still resonate today. Do not fear, for I have delivered him into your hands. Similarly, David's declaration before Goliath, the battle belongs to the Lord, speaks to the reality that our challenges are not ours to face alone. God is with us, fighting for us, and guiding us to victory. Remembering God's past faithfulness not only strengthens our trust, but also inspires hope. It reminds us that every battle has a purpose. The Israelites didn't just defeat Og and Goliath for the sake of victory. These triumphs prepared them for greater challenges ahead. Each victory was a stepping stone, reinforcing their faith and their identity as God's chosen people. When we take time to reflect on how God has worked in our own lives, it changes our perspective. Perhaps there was a time when you faced a difficult situation and God provided in ways you couldn't have imagined. Maybe there was a moment when you felt lost and God gave you clarity and direction. These experiences are your own Og and Goliath victories, and they are worth remembering. Trusting God doesn't mean we won't face challenges. It means that when the giants appear, we can stand firm, knowing we are not alone. Like David, we can step forward with faith, declaring that our strength comes from the Lord. Like Moses, we can lead with confidence, knowing that God has already secured the victory. So, when you face your own giants, remember the stories of Og and Goliath. Let them inspire you to trust in God's power, even when the odds seem impossible. Reflect on the times God has been faithful in your life, and let those memories build your faith for the future. God's promise is clear: the battle is mine. He is always with us, always faithful, and always greater than any obstacle we face. In every challenge, remember to trust in the Lord, knowing that with Him, no wall is too high, no giant too strong, and no battle too great. Let your faith in God's power guide you forward, and you will see His hand at work, just as Moses and David did long ago.